Quando Rosso vuole parlare, si sente?
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for being here. I'm Sergio Pace, probably some of you know me, and I'm very, very happy to introduce your second ACC lecture for this year. And I'm very happy because these lectures are pretty important for your education, I think, because they give you the possibility to meet people that, well, sometimes are rarely present in our rooms here in Turin. And this is the case of our guest today, who is Fulvio Irace. Fulvio Irace is a friend of mine, and I'm honored to be his friend. He's an architecture historian. He has taught at the Politecnico di Milano for all his life, but also in many other universities, such as, for instance, the University of Mendrisio, you know, the university in the Italian Switzerland, founded by Mario Botta for many years, and probably still today. You're still going to Mendrisio? No. Yeah. Last year. He has studied a number of subjects, almost always linked to contemporary architecture, and in particular with a particular focus on Milan, and which is the city where he lives, and the architectural culture in Milan soon before and soon after the Second World War, in the central decades of the 20th century. One among the many authors he tackled during the years, there is, for instance, Angelo Mangiarotti, who was a great designer, whose work is explored until the end of April in an exhibition at the Triennale di Milano, presented by Professor Irace. One of the cores of his research along the years, I don't know how many articles and essays and books is written on the subject, is about Gion Ponti, which is who is one of the greatest Italian architects, one of the most well-known architects around the world, Italian architects around the world. He's one of the few names, such as Renzo Piano, such as that you can give wherever you go, and they all know Gion Ponti. He was a major character in Milan. He was the author of extraordinary pieces of architecture. He was the subject of another exhibition 3 years ago, something like that. No, yeah, 2019. Well, just before pandemic at the Maxi in Rome, and also in this case there's a wonderful catalog about that. And Gion Ponti, which is a detail, but not that much a detail in this venue, is the author of a book called Amate l'Architettura, Please Love Architecture, which is the root of our lectures this year. So Fulvio Irace was the best to introduce us to what is Amate l'Architettura and what is all the rest which comes after Amate l'Architettura. Fulvio.
Thank you very much, Sergio, for your generous presentation, and thanks to all the audience. I'm very pleased and honored to be here in the Politecnico di Torino. I used to be very present in the past decades with the dottorato and the school, so it's a lively comeback somehow. So yes, the student that organized this series of lectures asked me to talk about this book written by Gion Ponti, edited in 1957, from which takes the title of your cycle of lecture, which is Amate l'architettura. So today I, of course, would not speak extensively about Gion Ponti's architectures, but I will focus mainly on the genesis and the history of the book, and maybe give some hints about its importance and significance for the understanding of the Gion Ponti's theories, as well as to focus on some highlights of the decades in which this book was published, which coincides with so-called golden era, or golden season of Italian architecture outside the borders of our nation, because Gion Ponti was, I mean, before getting to the names that you mentioned, like Renzo Piano or Aldo Rossi, which date back to the 80s or the 90s, but in the 50s, Gion Ponti was the most, maybe the unique, well-known architects all over the world, because his works spread from South America to Northern America to Europe, from Holland to Austria, of course, Italy, till to extreme east, till to Hong Kong. So it was exactly a forerunner of what we call today a global architect, although no features of him coincides with the practice of a global architect today, as I will try to explain. So let's go to our, okay. It doesn't go. Okay, va bene. So, what is the beginning of the book? So I said that the book was published in 1957, which was the beginning of the so-called Italian miracle or Italian boom, the explosion of post-war Italy in the world. But its history dates back more than a decade before. Exactly, it dates back to the hard times of the last years of the Second World War. In 1944, Gion Ponti, together with his friend Vittorio Bini, they published a book. So the war was not ended yet, but they published a book, a very budget book made with recycled paper, with all the difficulties that you can imagine in the publishing industry of the time, called Cifre Parlanti. So it's about, you know, he wants to say what the dates are speaking about. And as you see from the subtitle, ciò che dobbiamo conoscere, what we have absolutely to know to reconstruct the country, to reconstruct the nation, to reconstruct Italy. So the meaning of that is that while the war had not yet ended, Ponti was still thinking about the future, the optimism of the project. Okay, sorry. Also in 1944, Gion Ponti edited another book, which has only been discovered, which has only been discovered in these very, very recent years, called Il Coro, Imaginary Chronicles, which is a sort of storyboard to be performed in theater. In fact, it's been performed for the first time last year in Milano. Was very exciting and also amazing. And Il Coro, it's a small book which tells somehow the story is not about architecture, but it's about humanity. It's about workers. The highest peak of professional work, from doctor, for instance, till to the lowest one of the society, to the cleaners, to the stone makers, which makes a car all together, evocating and invocating the presence of God. Because, of course, another thing that we must say about Gion Ponti was that he was deeply imbued with the Catholic truth and religion, which was not just, let's say, the habit to go into church, because he, although he built a number of notable churches still to the Cattedrale di Taranto, he didn't usually went to Mass, but he was profoundly Catholic in the authentic sense of the word. Sorry. Here again, in 1944, so can you imagine that while the bombs were breaking down buildings in Milan, interior parts of the city, Gion Ponti, of course, he could not properly work because there was not work for architects in times of bombing. He was projecting to words and theories. And he was profoundly involved in an editorial publishing activity. For instance, this book, which he signed with a nickname Archias, was named Politica dell'Architettura. So he was pointing out to the necessary link between architecture and politics, not in the meaning of the fascist regime that architecture should represent the power, but on the contrary, on the power that architecture itself, as an act of projecting, has to have towards the society. And this says, well, that's rather funny. This is typical of Gion Ponti. Can you see here? It says, we do not, I mean, we are not giving you cards, covers, cellophane, and so on, and colors, but we sell you ideas. This is another term which is recurrent in the iconography of Gion Ponti, the ideas. In fact, he will define himself in letters to friends and also in some public writings, Architettura, Amate l'architettura, he will define it as an ideario, which means a repository, a treasures of ideas. And if you read here, L'Architettura Moderna, it says, this is one of the quotes from the book, it says that the modern architecture teach us another things. What does it teach? That we have to manage for the house of man, for his life, his culture, his civilization, its morality. So the architecture is at the service of humanity. These words are very important. We still live in the echo of star architecture, in which architecture is reduced to a sort of linguistic print. And so these words by Gion Ponti, I think they are a strong indication to what we should assume as the task of an architect today, to be at the service of the society. We should be prophetic about men, civil men, men with capital letters. So architecture for Ponti is always a prophecy. Which means a prophecy? Well, the Latin works, the Latin etymology for the project, projectare, means to draw forwards, to go forward. So the progetto is a sort of bridge that should link the today, the contemporaneity, with the future. So architecture is exactly this kind of bridge. Oh, sorry. Okay. These are some of the contents of the books, which was, as you say here, ideari, parts of a small series of which only 2 or 3 have been really published by Garzanti Editore, who was the editor of the publisher of the magazine Stile, which Ponti had invented after having been forced to leave Domus. And these are on the extreme right of the screen. These are the titles of the books that were going to be published. For instance, number 5, it's interesting. La casa deve costare meno. We must project, design, and build houses, cheaper houses that are accessible to everyone. And then it's interesting also, number 6, shall we stay with living people or with dead people? Which way should we choose? Number 7, abitiamo bene o abitiamo male? Do we live well or do we live in a bad way? So the idea of Ponti is that while the Italy is bombed, while we see the ruins everywhere, we must imagine the future, the reconstruction, because this is the task of architecture. So on April the 13th of 1945, the last bombs of the Anglo American army fell on Milano, and the Anglo American troops entered actually in Milano. So while they were entering in Milano in April, on July, sorry, of the 15th of July, you could, people from Milano could have found in the bookshop or newspaper stands a book which was published by a small publisher house, Edit, which means Edizioni Italiane, Italian edition, which actually was the Giovanni Mazzocchi behind that, who was the editor of Domus, who printed a small book. It's not more than 13 centimeters. It's like this. It's a really pocket book in the literary sense of that, called L'architettura è un cristallo. Architecture is a crystal, which revised and expanded in a slightly bigger format, was going to be published nearly 10 years and more later, with the best-known title of Amate l'Architettura, later in the American edition of the 60s, in praise of architecture. What does it mean, l'architettura è un cristallo? Here we have a sample of some of the pages of the book. All the illustration are drawings drawn by Gion Ponti himself. So you don't see pictures, you don't see, I mean, everything is very simple. Everything is very budget-like. Everything is very cheap because of the difficulties, of course, of the industry at that moment. The shortage of cards for printing. Most of the factories had been bombed and destroyed, so it was very hard time. But despite its format and content, as I like to introduce and explain the meaning of that book, I think it's considered as a war book. What does it mean, a war book? It means that it's parts of a series of small budget publication written, as Ponti himself used to say, in the furor of events themselves. So you're just in the middle of a storm, you're just in the belly of hell, and you are thinking at the future. So you're, I mean, in the most pessimistic condition, but in most optimistic previsions of a future. The idea of the prophecy, the architect as a prophet who sees forward. Some of these books you've seen before, from Le Cifre Parlanti till Il Coro. And as you have seen, I mean, the nature of this publication is very heterogeneous in itself. And the frequency, only in 1944, as you've seen, 3 books have come out, and others will follow till to 1946, was due to the anxiety of communicating in the hard times of war, and especially in the beginning of the post-war scenario, in the midst of realistic perception of the catastrophe from one side and the need of a vital reaction from the other. I think it's really enchanting the way Ponti was successful in turning the difficulties of printing and having proper pictures recurring to the technique of the drawings. These are some of the drawings, very simple, in which there is always presence the human being. And this is another important question, the presence of the sun, the presence of the moon, the presence of the people, even the woman who opens the shutters of a window to announce, a new era. Classical elements belonging to Italian architecture, like the portico, and then the instance on stairs, the instance of the enclosed space of a room and the flooring. That will be some of the elements that will characterize later Amate architecture. In the same year, 1945, only a few months later, September the 30th, another book came out that he wrote together with Adalberto Libera, and of course a lot of other people, Pier Giulio Bosisio, Pierangelo Pozzi, Soncini, Vaccaro, Carlo Villa, Guido Berretti, called Towards the Exact House, which was another obsession or prophecy of Gion Ponti. What is the exact house? In this book, which came out in a series of publication under the common target of ricostruzione, unificazione, here, reconstruction, unification. So Ponti was launching the idea of the necessity of unification, as that means of modular architecture, as a way to give an answer to the extreme need of having a new housing for people, because the 70% of the Italian patrimony of houses was completely or nearly completely destroyed by the bombs. So the first need was to reconstruct the houses for people. So they had to be economical houses, budget houses. And he said, we have to precisely, as architects, define exactly what we need. We cannot run the risk of losing space, of wasting space. So the house must be exact. Which means that these are here all the contents which are explained in the book, which means that he was very well aware of what was happening in Europe at that moment. Especially, was very fond of a book that appeared in 1944 by Le Corbusier, Sur les quatre routes, which was also again about the reconstruction. And he said, all my ideas, they come from Le Corbusier. It's not true, but I mean, the homage to Le Corbusier was very sincere. In 1946, again, another book, completely different, also with the nickname of Archias, which was named Ringrazio Dio che le cose non vanno a modo mio. This is a quote from Maria Cabrini, Madre Cabrini. Madre Cabrini was like Madre Teresa di Calcutta in India. Madre Cabrini was a Lombard woman. She came from Piacenza, from the countrysides, interior countrysides of Lombardia, and she was the Mother di Calcutta in New York. Their work towards fostering the immigrants, the poverty was really, astonishing. And Ponti was an admirer of Madre Cabrini. And this also explains his Catholic vein, which means let's say, in the Lombard moon, to be Catholic means not to go to the church and pray, but to do an active, presence in the society. So helping people, giving people advice, giving people shelter, giving people food. And this is what exactly Madre Cabrini did. So one of the frequent says by Madre Cabrini was, I thank God that the things do not go my way, because my way is the way which is limited to in a human perspective, but God, which means the providence, knows better than I do. So there is a divine drawing which is better than anything that man can do. And he was so fond about this book, which was an exhortation also to the Catholics to take an active role in the reconstruction, that he wanted to republish the book years later, always with this title, but with another editor. Just let me focus for your attention on the overcover here, which says, we are 45 millions of people that has been christened, so 45 millions of Christians. So this means that this book is of a very strict interest for every one of us. So this is a book which addresses the Catholics in order to say, you have to take your responsibility and your place in the society, because especially for the history of our country, our history of art, let's think from the medieval times, Renaissance and whatever, has always been an art that we find in churches, in cathedrals, which celebrates our society. So he says, if the popes and the priests of antiquity have fostered and encouraged artists to give the best of themselves, we do not have to renounce to this privilege. We have to exercise this privilege. So we have to be active in not only, let's say, stay in veneration of the past, but in creating the arts of our own time. So as I was saying, in 1956, so 10 years later, he was so fond of this book, of the contents of this book, that he asked his friend Daria Guarnati, who was a journalist and a very sophisticated publisher of a series of a wonderful quarterly magazine, especially one called Aria d'Italia, which was a very large format book with a sort of international glamour about it. Every one of these covers was designed and made by an artist, from De Chirico to Ponti to Sironi to others. So he asked Daria Guarnati to republish the book. In fact, it says Guarnati Milano here, but it's called Paradise Lost with a question mark. So 10 years later, he's saying, what is the state of the facts 10 years later? Did we regain or lost again the paradise that I was advocating for? Area d'Italia also dedicated in 1954 a special monographic issue to Gion Ponti, a very famous one, which has been reprinted 10 years later by the Triennale di Milano, in the occasion of a major exhibition that should be organized for New York, but then it was only Milano. But this is the original edition of 1954, and it's called The Expression of Gion Ponti, with an introduction by his friend Nathan Shapira, who will later conceive and design an exhibition, a traveling exhibition, expressions of Gion Ponti, all along the different venues in the States. Nathan Shapira was great. He was an architect and a strong admirer of Gion Ponti's works, that he wanted to be known all over the world, and mainly in the USA. 1954, Ponti had started working again. He had a new office in Milano, and it was the time in which his first travels outside Italy, especially in South America, in Venezuela, had started his international career. So it was a very delicate point. Ponti was something between 50 and 60, so not exactly a young architect. But what is interesting is that he started a new career with the enthusiasm of a young architect, reinventing himself, but at the same time keeping a strong continuity with the past, but only revising the idea of the past in a very unprecedented way, which was the basis of his fortune as an architect. In 1960, to accompany the traveling exhibition of expression of Gion Ponti, Giuseppina and Mario Salvadori translated the Amate l'Architettura for the Dodge Corporation publisher company. This is interesting, how because this is the question that also we were posed by the Maxi Museum when we organized the exhibition. How can we translate Amate l'Architettura, love architecture, which would be, rather immediate or natural, but maybe it seems to American eyes ears a little bit too naive. So it was named in praise of architecture, which keeps the same content, which is an eulogy of architecture as the art of the future, but at the same time it betrays its real meaning. Because it's not only, Amate l'Architettura does not mean an eulogy of architecture. It also contains an exhortation to people to love, to be parts of architecture. And of course, when Ponti says this, he's not addressing just architects, because in the introduction of Amate l'Architettura, he spends many words saying this book is dedicated to industrialists. This book is dedicated to doctors, because doctors have to exercise their influence on architects in order to build good hospitals, which means modern hospitals. This book is dedicated to teachers, because the teachers have to ask architects to build modern schools, and so on and so on. So the idea of Ponti is that the audience of this book were not architects, which is just a small group, but it's the whole of the society. Because, of course, as you've seen before in the books published a few years before, is ideal of the function of the architect in the society was exactly this. The architect is involved, is a civil servant for the society. He is an activist of an architecture which, to serve in a perfect, performative way, the society must be modern. This is another crucial topic by Ponti. The idea of modernity is not linked to only a language. He says modernity is not a style, which is what, I mean, he was always questioning during the 30s with rationalist architects. He said always, be aware of not confusing, for instance, large glass facades with modernity, because this is something which belongs to the fashion of a moment. But when the fashion will be over, so your architecture will become old. So modernity is a concept which is more connected to the idea of being contemporary. Contemporaneous means contempo, to be at the same time of. So the architect must be the interpreter and the one who gives form. It gives expression. Espressione di Gion Ponti was the name of the monographic issue of Area d'Italia. So he has to give expression to the way we live. This is absolutely fundamental to understand Gion Ponti's ideals. So when we look to the pages of Area d'Italia, these are some of the chapters. It's divided in chapters. Also, this is another interesting question. So we have here an architect. I mean, you are architects, so you know that especially if you are searching for a job and you maybe have to go for an interview in an office, in an atelier of architecture, they ask you, do you have a portfolio with you? Can I see your dossier? What? Because the portfolio is a sort of self-portrait of what you do, what you can do, what are your ideas. So this book can be imagined as a portfolio of an architect who had a very consolidated career. Can you imagine that Ponti had built huge buildings such as the Montecatini building, a lot of villas, a lot of apartment housing, condominiums. So he had a very huge portfolio, but he reduced all these elements of the past just to one or two chapters, just in order to say this is what I was. And as you can see, number 9, one of the last chapters is Opere in Costruzione, which means the works that are on our desktop. Here you see so he has designed the layout of this book like a self-portrait, which mix together issues not along typology. So you don't have villas, condominium, housing, factories, but they are there is a sort of crossover typology, for instance, nostalgic for classicism, new modernity, and so on, which links together past, present, and futures. I mean, it may seem an oxymoron to a sort of discontinuous continuity somehow. because Ponti says we are always ourselves, also when we change ourselves. But there is a sort of internal thread which links all our thoughts, and we should follow this this thread. So here we have this image here. It's the office, his atelier in Via Dezza, which was part of a building that he had designed and built himself. Was the last houses, the houses in which he died, actually. And the office was like an hangar, like a garage that was, I mean, today we would say it was a loft, but the word loft in 1950 was something that didn't mean anything in Italy or also in Milan, but it was exactly a loft. It was a prophecy for the future. And can you imagine that all the employers and the assistants of Ponti, they could have the possibility of accessing their desktop while they were using their Vespa. So they could drive in. It was a drive-in office. So they parked their Vespa and started to work. Of course, finding Ponti that was present since 7 o'clock in the morning. He was waiting for them and leaving, you know, pieces of cards saying, remember that this morning we have to do this, and then call me later, and so on, and so on. So these are, you know, some hints of the his office with all the details, for instance, of the models, which is interesting because it shows us also the way he used it to express and experiment architecture. He used it very much, of course, the drawing is first, but also the model, the maquette, was one of the most frequent tools of experimenting architecture, and to show, also to show clients. So in starting from 1955, he felt the urgency of defining his thoughts at the lights of all these works that were enriching his portfolio. It was the time he was designing the Planchart villa in Caracas, for instance, which I hope you already know. I do not have pictures of any one of his works, as I said before. So he felt the exigency of making a synopsis or a synthesis of his thought. So his first idea was, okay, why don't I reprint, as he did with Ringrazio Dio, which became Paradise Lost or Regained. He said, okay, it would be nice to republish it, L'architettura è un cristallo, which was in size as much as a third of this book. So it was not, you know, nothing more than this. It was exactly a very small book. So he contacted a publisher in Genova. Vitaly Ghianda was the name of the publisher. Of course, Ponti was very well known at that time. She was a prestigious author. Of course, Vitaly Ghianda, they were very glad to publish a book by Gion Ponti. Although it was so exigent somehow, so enthusiastic and exigent as well, that the genesis of the book took more than 3 years to be realized. So the first thing was about the title. Vitaly Ghianda said, okay, the book would be called L'architettura in cristallo. Then we have discovered letters in the Gion Ponti archives where he said, okay, but L'architettura in cristallo, he said, you know, a lot of people have bought. I don't think so. I don't think that a lot of people really had bought L'Architettura in Cristallo, but he said, okay, this is a very well-known book. So if we call it L'Architettura in Cristallo, all the people that has bought it would say, why should I buy it again? It's the same book that I already have. We should find another title. And he said, why don't we call it Amate l'architettura? Amate l'architettura is like a shout, in an enthusiastic shout, which betrays all the optimism of Gion Ponti, of course, there was a sort of wrestling dialogue with the publisher, and at the end, they agreed in saying, okay, we call it Amate l'architettura, but the subtitle is L'architettura in cristallo. But there are two editions of the book at the same time. This is with the cover that was designed by Ponti, and this other one, I'm not sure he really designed it. Of course, he must have agreed, but it's a simple one. It's, more like it sounds more like a manifesto, very synthetic. It's called just Amate l'architettura, Vitaly Ghianda, the publisher. So we have two editions of the same book in the same time. This is also typical of Gion Ponti, because also in his magazine, to which he had been called back by Giovanni Mazzocchi, he used Domus as an experiment, especially for the covers. Every month was changing ideas involving artists, designers, and so on, changing the pages, the color of pages, introducing novelties, because he was always, bored of repeating. So he didn't like repeating, he wanted always something new. So it says, okay, of this book, there were two editions, one an ordinary edition, which was the one before, and the other one, just graphic edition in green and blue. This is a quote from the book. He says, this book is for all the people who loves architecture or who loves our civilization. So here again, this is important. Architecture is equal to civilization. So if you love architecture, you live civilization. You are made for civilization. There's no way of mistake. This is not a book on architecture, but a book for architecture. So it's not a theoretical book, it's not an historical book, it's a word book, it's a pamphlet, it's something which somehow belongs to the spirit of the avant-garde. This libes, well, it's quite hard to translate all these jokes of words, but he says that this book has not been architettato, means it's not been the result of an architectural project, but it's most of all a collection of ideas, or un ideario. A coordination of ideas along your own choice, so you can choose. In fact, one of the characteristics of this book, one question, have you ever seen this book? You have, see, so you have gone also through the pages. So one most notable thing is that this is what Umberto Eco would have been called later an open book, un'opera aperta, or an open work, which means you can start to read the book from whatever you like, from the beginning to the end, from the end to the beginning, from the middle to right, to the middle to the left. So I mean, it's a collection of fragments. Each one has been concluded itself like a gem somehow. So this is, and then this says, this help, it will help you to, let's say, think at this book as your book, a personal book, something that you have contributed to. This book has been done exactly with the same technical mood of a painter. How do you paint? You paint the first touch, then you retouch, then you design details, which means that the process is not a process, a fast process, but it's a process which goes along a sort of re-elaborating time. So you in fact, all the drafts of the books shows the signs of continuous correction. I don't like this word anymore, this expression, so cancel it and choose a new one. So it was very tantalizing process. Which means that a book like this is a never-ending book. In fact, if it was for Ponti, the poor publisher, the poor Vitaly Ghianda would have never have come to the end of the book. So at the end, they had to impose on the architects, and we're spending too much money. Please give us the book, whether it's finished or not. Maybe you will do another one in the future. But for Ponti, it was an unfinished book, because this book is an autobiography. So I said, as I'm a living man, and I'm not sure that I will live, I will die tomorrow, but maybe I will live many other years. It's an autobiographical book. Every reedition. So while he was publishing the book, he was just thinking of re-editing the book again. Every reedition means to redo the book. And then this is also interesting. In this book, you won't find original in brackets idea or new in brackets idea, because it says the original ideas doesn't mean anything, because we can state that there are not in the words ideas that we could really consider original. But what is important are the expression of a thought. So few things are original, maybe what we call the archetypes. But these archetypes, what is new is that they can be reinterpreted by the author along its own expression. Espressioni di Gion Ponti, espressioni d'Italia. This word expression is another recurrent topic in the language of Gion Ponti, which is very important. He says, for instance, the Catastrophes Pirelli is the expression of Gion Ponti in the 60s. It's an autobiography of the architect. Okay, let's go on. These are some of the drawings also that have been found in the Gion Ponti's archives, in which he's studying the lettering, the title, and so on and so on, that have been reconstructed this history in a very recent reedition of the book published by Rizzoli International, by Salvatore Lecitra, who is the nephew of Gion Ponti, the son of Lisa, the Gion Ponti's daughter, beloved daughter. But this is the drawing, one of the drawing. All the drawings by Gion Ponti. This is 28-257, so the book was under publication. All the drawings of Gion Ponti are interested with writings, comments, short drawings, which exactly describes the feverish style of his mind, which was always elaborating something new. And this on the right, it's another drawing in which you see he was elaborating this motif, which will be a recurring part of the iconography of his architecture and design of the time, which he calls the Arlequin's dress, which we find, for instance, in the 3 villas built and designed for Caracas, in some invention as the decoration of walls and doors and so on, which is a geometrical motif, a very simple one. I would also remind, for instance, that the symbol of the triangle was very well known to the Viennese secession from Klimt to Hoffmann, and Gion Ponti was a very a friend and most of all a very admirer of Joseph Hoffmann, to which he corresponded also till to the end of his life. He died in 1954. I try to remember. Okay, so in the late 50s, this is the point of our lecture. Amate l'architettura became the manifesto of a transformation that had taken place as witnessed by the tormented process of the editing, which consisted primarily in the effort by Ponti of giving an account of his position in the decade of reconstruction. So it was a book which was exactly complementary to Espressioni d'Italia 1954, no? It was, I mean, we have to read them together. Is a theory of the diamond or crystal, which is one of the main issue of the book Architettura è un cristallo, as the basic form of architecture, was going to be the leading line of his future activity along the following decades, while serving at the same time as an indication on how to develop the principles of a social architecture out of the shallows of the declined rationalistic theory. Why I'm saying this? Well, first of all, I mean, what does it mean? Have you ever asked yourself what could this expression mean? Why architettura is a crystal? Anyone who wants to give his interpretation of this concept, or has asked himself, what does it mean? Yeah. Don't be shy.
No.
No.
There's an answer over there. Fulvio.
Yes.
Over there.
Okay, because yes.
Okay, so. It is like a sphere. Okay.
Okay. Yes, although I would hardly define the sphere as a diamond, because a diamond usually is multifaceted. Yeah. Is not a sphere properly, no? Yeah. But a sphere is more like a pill. But anyway, yes.
Raise your voice.
Okay. Yes. Please. With the microphone. But no, because so everyone can understand.
Yeah.
Like the diamond that have a lot of different facades. Also, the architecture have can be seen like something that have a different point of view from the perspective of the people that live the construction.
Okay. Yes.
Multifaceted activity of man.
Yes.
Also, maybe we can relate it to reflections, how architecture can reflect our society.
Okay.
And maybe transparency as well.
Okay.
I think there are plenty of concepts which we can relate to the architecture from the diamond.
Yes, and of course, you all have in mind that, I mean, studying history of architecture, you also may have in mind the famous expression by the Bruno Taut, for instance, in his expressionistic period in the first word, the Greek word, l'architettura di cristallo, crystal architecture, glacier de Kette, for instance. Do you have in mind that idea of, for instance, the Alps? The vision of the Alps, which are transformed in a series of gems, shining gems, the glass pavilion in the Collodi 1954. I mean, it was a term which was largely used in that short span of time, which expressed in those times the idea of a sort of hope more than a prophecy towards something shining and pure against the darkness and brutality of the world. There is also this. Okay. Okay, I think that, I mean, there is, oh no, must be, I don't want to conciliate everything, but I mean, each one of you has pinned up something interesting. Yes, the crystal, of course, is multifaceted, but you say it gives way to different perspectives. We have to be careful about this, and I say you why. You say reflections. Yes, of course, the idea of reflecting architecture would take a great place in Gion Ponti developing buildings especially in the 60s, through the use of small ceramic tiles, which he called the diamond-shaped tiles, which he designed himself. But of course, it was not Mies van der Rohe reflection, as the project, for instance, of the skyscraper for Friedrichstrasse. Do you remember the unrealized projects in which there is an envelope of glass, which Mies says is not about transparency, but it says it's about darkness, the contrast of shining and darkness, so creating shadows. So no, in Gion Ponti there is not that interest, but his facades, a diamond-shaped facade, is the idea that when the sun runs through the sky from the dawn to sunset, it curves the facade of the buildings along different angles. So, which means that the facade is always animated, because when you, I mean, according to the angulation of the sun, of the rays of the sun, you have a play of shadows, because each one of the single elements of the tiles is tridimensional. It's shaped like a diamond, and it creates a different form of shadowing and glamour on the other side. The first idea, the basic idea about architecture being a crystal is that a crystal is always a closed form. Okay, we do not have any blank. No blank. Okay, but I mean, yes. Imagine a diamond, for instance. A diamond, no, it's it may be a small, a bigger one according to the budget of your pocket, but it's always a closed form, no? Which means that if architecture must be a diamond, architecture must be a closed form. What does it mean to be a closed form? Of course, you can understand all the polemics in these words according to the rationalistic theory, especially as applied in the international style, which was becoming in the post-war, with the victory of the states of Europe, the universal language of the new modernity. He says, for instance, if you take a level house or even a building by Mies, you can always add some floors on the top. If you think at some buildings by Gropius, you can always think that you can add on both sides new wings, new addition, which means that the form is never finished. I do not believe that a good architecture could be an unfinished architecture. An architecture to be good must be impossible to extend, must be closed. This is why he indicates this prophecy of the closed form as a target to be reached by architects while they were reconstructing our landscape, the skylines of our city. So always give a shape to the single building which can be replicated, but can be altered in its essential essence, essential nature. And of course, this was his reply exactly to the influence of the international style, which also was shinily taking place in Milano when the city was debating, for instance, about the issue of high-rise building or skyscraper building. For instance, the Grattacielo Pirelli was an exact answer to this question: how can a skyscraper be a closed firm? Because the plan of the Grattacielo Pirelli was exactly like two valves of an ostrich, or in other ways was lozang, like Harlequin, was a diamond shape. So it was not a box like, for instance, Mies Seagram was a classic parallelepiped, no? Pontiated that form, no? Because it could have been expanded. So he designed the plan of the Grattacielo Pirelli since the beginning, with the two sides which were making an angle, and the facade which was continuous and all covered with diamond-shaped tiles. The two, I'm sorry, I have to draw with my hands in the air, but I'm sure that you can understand. But so this is the plan of the Pirelli with the innovative structure. So the greatest contribution by Pierluigi Nervi, who invented a new type of structure instead of the classical balloon frame or concrete or steel frame. And the two wings of the Pirelli sides were not touching one with the other, but were detached with the space of a small balcony in the middle. So the fact that were openings calls back to another ideas, which was Ponti's obsession. He called it la facciata leggera, the light facade. Because we are building using a concrete or a steel frame, the wall is not anymore a bearing wall. So the wall is not supporting the structure, but it's supported by structure. So if it is supported, it must be very, very light. It must denounce its lightness. Of course, it's like a curtain wall, but while the curtain wall is anonymous because it's just a modular repetition of the same model, and it's completely transparent, the Ponti facciata leggera is always covered, cladded with this kind of tiles. He designed the new types and patented each one of them for each building. So they are generally diamond shaped, by each one as a different kind of angles. And the facade, as it did in Villa Planciate, was also suspended from over and nearly floating over the soil, so it did not touch ground, in order to reveal its lightness. And as it happened with the Grattacielo Pirelli, if you have it in mind, you must remember that the roof, which is covering the Grattacielo Pirelli, thanks to the internal structure by Pierluigi Nervi, the two inner pilasters that go beyond the walls, sustain, two pillars sustain the roof, and so the walls can be beneath the roof, and all these parts here can be lightened from inside. And he says, he uses a beautiful expression. He says the Pirelli is like an angel with halo, un angelo con l'alone, which is the halo of light, which gives, since distance, as seen from distance, the lightness of the Pirelli. This is why, for instance, we usually call in Milano the Pirelli, we call it Pirellone, because we want to mean it's big, but he always hated this expression. Ponti was the inventor of the superleggera, super light chair. So he said, why call it pirellone, which in Italian means something which is heavy? I would rather call it pirellino because it's so light. So the idea of lightness was an expression of the civilization of our own times. Of course, here again, there is another reference, if you allow me to Hoffman, especially to Palais Stocklet, that he loved very much. If you remember Palais Stocklet in Brussels, it's a castle, an urban castle, which is made of which is covered by slabs of marble. Each one of these slabs is divided and linked to the other by a sort of bronze, golden bronze fixtures, which sticks together and make it likened to a castle of cards, which Ponti admired very much, this idea of lightening the mass, breaking the surfaces. But coming back to our books, you say, sì, ho finito. This is the last one. These are some of the pages of the book, and you can see the proportions of Amate l'architettura and l'architettura è un cristallo. These are some of the samples of his, in terms of no computer, no renders, and so on. This is the layout of the book, which is a storyboard. Yet again, we do not have pictures, no shooting, but only drawings done by the architect himself. Just another notice, yes, this is the cards of the chapter of colors that, like Pantone, for just to say something close to us, which the editor, the publisher sent to him because he said, I want to give the idea of the fragmentation of the face of the crystals also physically, visually in the books. So this is the colors that he chose. And when you go to the pages of the book, you can see that any chapter is somehow divided, not only by the Politica dell'Architettura, so this is the title, which goes back to the book, but also by different colors. So it's the shining face of the crystals of which the book becomes an expression, a manifesto in itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fulvio. It was extremely clear and extremely fascinating how Gion Ponti reached the final result of the book. Do you have any quick question? Because we know that you have to go back to traditional lessons, or you have them? No? Just one more further information. Amate l'architettura has been republished many times, and quite recently by Quadlibet in Italian.
Yes.
Another.
After Rizzoli.
Yeah, after Rizzoli, there is another, which I think is still on sale in major bookshops. You can also find the text. I don't know why, but on internet you can find anything. You can find the text on academia.edu. It's the text without, well, with very few images, with other colors.
Yes.
But you can read.
But it's the Italian text? Or
The Italian text. Yeah, Italian text. So if you don't have any, I think we run out of time now. I would have many questions. For instance, I try to stress what Fulvio Irace said. For instance, how many questions he posed. For instance, about the public in architecture. Gion Ponti was one of the major figures during the 20th century who reflected on what is public, the public in architecture, who is supposed to be interested in architecture. This is a crucial term, because today, for instance, we do not wonder anymore about who is the public for architecture. And probably that's why many architects do not speak to anyone but them or but their colleagues. But is there anyone, is there any architect in the world, not in Italy, but in the world, who has a public figure, who is a public character? Do anyone in the street know some architect? Yes, maybe Renzo Piano, but in Italy it's different. And he doesn't write, for instance. He writes very, very few things. And this is one of the crucial terms. Then the question about prophecy. Do we have room for prophecies? Still, we have room for prophecies. They believe in that. They believed in that. Gion Ponti, but also his colleagues in the 1940s, 1950s, they believed that prophecy was indispensable for architecture, that prophecy was another term, as Fulvio Irace said, for project. Yes. Because project has the same root of prophecy. Prophecy is to say before, to say for the future, to say something, to speak for the future, which is the project. We produce, this is my impression, we produce, architects produce a number of projects, an incredible number of projects, very tiny prophecies. Projects today, but this is a question. We want to leave you with this doubt, probably. Projects today are much more the re-elaboration of what we know, the re-elaboration of the present time, than much more that than prophecies. Also here there is, also in architecture, there's a sort of a plague or of a doubt, which a great French historian, François Hartog, called the presentisme, the presentism. Everything is present. There's no past, there's no future, there's only present. Well, in present, there should be space for prophecies or not. I don't know, but probably Gion Ponti had some clues about that. Okay, we thank very, very much Fulvio Irace for coming back to Turin. And thanks to the organizer. I'll leave you the word for the next meeting, I think.
Yes, only a couple of things. Thanks again to Professor Fulvio Irace and to Professor Sergio Pace for the very interesting insights and doubts that you put in our heads. And we want to see some of those in the comments in the site. And yeah, we want to remind you this, and also that you have to sign at the beginning of the lesson. So that's it. You know what to do. We communicate, by the way, on the site and on the socials. And again, an applause for our guests. And we'll see you next week. Yeah.
Do you have a no? It's a surprise.
No, we don't know what it's written.
It's a surprise, like the Oscar-winning film.
Please make sure, if you're here for the 3 credits, to certify your presence today. So sign the paper that we ask you to sign every time before class starts. And most of you weren't here the first time that we explained what the student tasks are, but you're supposed to do a comment on the blog, and there are more things that you have to do, and they're mandatory, but you can find everything on the website. So please check that out.